Episode number 189 of Sunday Gold's, a Florida State baseball podcast, now is in recording and over the air on YouTube, on social media, as well as everywhere you get it on audio-only versions, Apple, Spotify, Google, and again, everywhere else. Do want to thank those of you who have been listening with us for almost now 200 total episodes. Pretty incredible. Spanning over 5 years. And Brett, as you and I get back into this thing, again, everybody knows, I think, who listens to this pod, but if you're new to this and this is your first time listening, he's Brett Nevitt. I'm Ariya Masudi, and both of us have loved every second of being able to do this podcast for the last 5 years, man. Multiple head coaches, a lot of tough ends to a season. Some have ended in Omaha, some before then. Nothing new, right, for us to have to come on here after what was a disappointing regional for Florida State overall. Couldn't get the job done and create the entire comeback to beat St. John's and win the Tallahassee regional. And we've got a lot to get into, I think, in this pod. Wanted to take a couple of days off just to kind of gather our thoughts, gain some perspective, allow ourselves to come on here and have, I think, a very measured podcast. A lot of good from this season. I think the team should be commended very much so for 40 more wins. That is always an accomplishment. And doing it when you lose one of the best players in college baseball, that makes it even more impressive. The guys really came together in tough circumstances and battled not just that major injury to Miles Bailey, but also within the team, a ton of injuries. They didn't even finish the season healthy, but the guys showed you that resiliency, I think, tooth and nail to the final out, as they've done all year under Link Jarrett. In the end, though, just not enough. And I think you and I will talk some later on in this pod about some of the things from a macro perspective that Florida State's going to look to improve upon going into next year to try and make sure that they're not in the same position, losing a regional at home to a gritty St. John's team that I gained a ton of respect for the way they play the game and how tough they are again. And I think the overall fight, if you talk about Florida State's fight, you also got to talk about the way St. John's fought. But ultimately, you should not be losing 2 games to St. John's in your own regional if you're the program of a caliber of a Florida State that they expect to be. And this year was also a little weird around college baseball. I think we'll talk some about the regionals all around the country, Brett, including the one in Gainesville where the Gators lost 2 games to Troy. And they're asking themselves a lot of the same questions right now in terms of what do they need to do to be able to not have that happen again. We'll get into all that, man. But I wanted to start off bringing you in by just gauging your thoughts on how the final game of the season went for the Seminoles against the Red Storm.
Yeah, I think, it just goes back to everything we've been saying and the small margin for error. And really, you kind of lose your season on one swing from Adam Agresti. And I know, they ended up scoring another run, and that other run ended up being the difference. But who knows if Cal hits the 2-run homer to tie the game there, if it's 4-2, what happens in that 9th if it's a 4-2 game. So, I mean, really that whole game changed on one swing, and it felt kind of game ending almost, even though it was in the 5th inning, and even though they'd come back really, multiple times recently, and we know that they're going to fight, but that kind of just felt like, the last blow that was going to be really hard to overcome. And if they had overcome that, that would have just been another, feather in their cap, but weren't able to do it. And, ultimately the error that happens in the 6th and more wild pitches allow that run to come across the plate. So that ends up being the difference. And that's something that is not new either. I mean, that was part of the reason that you lost on Friday in game 1. So, the reasons that they ended up losing that last game were things that we've seen throughout the year and things that had already cost them earlier in the weekend and had cost them the week prior against Pitt as well, and which was part of the reason that you weren't a top 8 national seed. So, yeah, I think, the pitch to Agresti from John was the right on right changeup that I think just didn't dive the way we're used to seeing John's changeup dive. It just kind of stayed flat and looked kind of like a bad fastball, even to the point Agresti in post game was like, I don't even know what pitch that was. I don't know if it was a cutter or changeup, but yeah, it's tough to lose twice to St. John's at home, like you said, and for that to be the ending of your season, it's kind of a sour taste left in your mouth after really starting to respect the way that the group fights and the way they had overcome a lot of stuff.
I think that word that you used, very adequate, right? And it fits. Respect. I have a lot of respect for this group. This is a group that, I think in the back of our minds, once Miles went down, we can say this now because it's June 4th and the season's over. I felt like at that point that the season was not over, but proverbially, it felt over, right? Like as soon as Miles went down, I had conversations with guys at ESPN that I work with, notable names that all texted me and said, man, Florida State's in deep, deep trouble. And they use different words than trouble. It felt done when you lose a guy like that and you knew what your lineup was with him and you knew that it revolved around what Miles was able to do and the respect Miles was going to get. And, Link was telling people before the season, our lineup isn't going to be as strong as it's been in years past. It's going to rely on Miles. And you were getting a season, a special one from Miles, and it was all coming to fruition for it to still be a pretty good offense with elite pitching. And the Noles finished the year with 395 team ERA, and I think the pitching is what kept you in every single game this year, and that's to be commended. Mike Opposey did an outstanding job with this staff. But that was the plan. Coming into the year, they knew they would be trying to win on the backs of pitching. They would be built on a strong pitching staff, and they ended the year top 10 in the country as a pitching staff. And that's where a lot of the portal and NIL went last year and in the summer, was to make sure you had a staff that could limit opposing offenses at the expense maybe of getting some players that could help you offensively. You just can't prepare for losing a guy like Miles Bailey. I just, at that moment, it felt like a dark cloud. And so my point with all of this is to say what the group accomplished without him is impressive. This is a success for Link Jarrett in terms of what happened. Now, there are bigger picture things that I think they know they will try and improve upon to make the team stronger offensively as a whole going into next year. One of those things is more left-handed bats. When you lose a guy like Miles and the left-handed power, you did lose a guy that could really balance the lineup in terms of a different look for opposing pitchers. And you just got right-handed heavy at times, which allows those breaking balls, to really, I think, have success against Florida State's righties. Teams were really able to take advantage of that. That'll be one area I'm curious to see if the Noles in the portal this offseason go and find more left-handed bats that just kind of balance it all the way through and give you a couple of different looks. And I think Link Jarrett said that as much in his post-game presser after the season, that he knew they needed some more lefties. But Brett, man, this group, tooth and nail, and I respect them for that. And they gave you everything they had, down to guys who hadn't hit for 3 seasons coming in and hitting home runs in the postseason for you, like Ben Barrett. Guys like Brody DeLa-Melier, who battled so much throughout the year. And I hate it for him that he was the final out of that game because he had been one of your best hitters in the final month of the season. But the list goes on, right? A lot of guys fought. Even John Abraham, who didn't pitch for over 3 weeks, he could have shut it down, right, and thought about the draft and being ready for that. But instead, he wanted the ball. And I hate that, he didn't have the sharpness that we had seen from him all year. But he wanted to pitch for his team, right? And he wanted to be there for a run for his squad. And a respect to Wes Mendez, who I saw go and grab a glove and started sprinting down to the bullpen there in the 9th inning, hoping that Florida State could tie or take the lead so that he could get one more crack on the mound for his Seminoles in relief. I'll remember this group. It wasn't pretty, but they fought their tails off, and the number of one-run losses, I think, tells you how razor thin the margin was, right? All the games this weekend, you won close and you lost close, and that's just been this group without Miles Bailey for the betterment of a couple of months.
Yeah, I think there were times this team was really, really frustrating, and times that they were also really enjoyable because of how they played. And with that fight we've talked about. I think, you mentioned John, thinking about it, I mean, John's injury ended up being just as catastrophic to the season as Miles. Like, even though John was able to come back and John's just a reliever, but it was like before John got hurt, every time he took the mound, I think I said this at some point this season on here, like every time he took the mound, it was a win for FSU. And, that flipped completely in the postseason to being the other thing, which is tough for John, because I think John had an awesome year and had made huge improvements from what we had seen in his first 2 years at FSU. But, as a reliever, ultimately you're kind of remembered for how things go in the end. And relievers are always remembered for, the losses rather than the wins. That's kind of just, that's the downside of being a reliever. But that injury ended up being, just as big to this season, because he definitely was not the same version of him we saw before the injuries. But, you have to use him there because of who he is and what he's meant to this season so far. Now, do you have to extend him out as much as they did? I don't think you had to, but, Link also the day before had been talking about they were trying to steal ounce because of the situation they were in, which they put themselves in on Friday with blowing the 5-2 lead there. So I think, everything just ends up going back to Friday and kind of getting off script in that game.
Yeah, I think you're spot on, especially when you think about how the weekend went with the weather. And if you just win Friday, you're not dealing with a lot of the mess. St. John's got all of Saturday off, right? An extra day of rest for some bullpen arms that threw on Friday, and they were in a great spot. And you got to give them a lot of credit for what they were able to accomplish. Again, St. John's earned a lot of respect from me. I actually think they're going to go play Alabama this weekend, and I think if Bama's not careful, St. John's kind of has this free mindset of we're not supposed to be here, and we're going to play with house money. And I would be very careful of teams like that. We've seen Northeast teams, Brett, time and time again, make it to Omaha with that same mentality of no one thinks we should be here. And a caveat, I think fans, a lot of you who listen know and are pretty knowledgeable, but I'm going to make the comment, to enlighten for those that might be curious. It's very difficult to gauge teams like St. John's because they don't play much of a fall ball and are under snow for a lot of the winter and into preseason. So when Florida State has all of this time to get outdoors, Mike Hampton was telling us, they had to play in a lacrosse field. They had one practice to get outside all year before the season started. It was very difficult for those guys, right? They're taking infield and indoor practice facilities. There's a lot of talent in the state of New York. There's a lot of talent in the Northeast. Brett, Massachusetts, Connecticut, those guys play ball up north. They do. And they love their Red Sox. They love the Yankees. They love the Mets. You name it. They follow it and they're passionate. There's just not as much opportunity for them to get outdoors. And so what ends up happening is the first few weekends to the first month or two ends up being a spring training of sorts for these teams, right? They're going to take their lumps, the pitchers especially. And you see some ugly scores, I think. And so these teams, by the time May and June roll around, are far different than what you would have seen in February. And I saw a lot of people saying, well, St. John's got swept by Kentucky and Arizona State. Well, they were also the spring training games for St. John's. So, yes, you're going to have some issues as you try and figure things out. Connecticut reminded me of that a couple of years ago. That's a far different baseball team whose talent and team makeup allows them to play at a different level later in the season. And you and I were commenting, St. John's had some really nice pieces and some really nice roster makeup and some arms that were low to mid 90s that I thought you may not have on the surface believed could be something St. John's has. So I thought that was an important note to add into this podcast. And they were seeded as a 4 seed, but didn't it feel like NIU was more of the 4 seed than St. John's was?
Yeah, and I think the biggest thing for St. John's was they played mostly clean baseball, and They didn't leave many runners on base. Obviously in their second game, they kind of went off with the bat, scoring 21 runs there. But yeah, I was very surprised by how the quality of their arms. Every arm they ran out there seemed, to me, at least in the two FSU games, that they seemed at least to be like 91, 93 with a decent breaking ball. And yeah, I think, offensively, Agresti, obviously the 2 home runs to center field were both lasers that were both loud and were really impressive. And I never really noticed him behind the plate either in a good way. Like, I feel like he just kind of blended into the game. And I really like their leadoff hitter, Legrand, I think is how you say it, John Legrand. I thought he was really good for them as well and created some havoc. So yeah, I'd be interested to see how they fare at Alabama.
Yeah, and I thought Fitzsimmons and Rafe Snyder also looked really good as left-handed bats that provided some balance for them and some thump too. So those guys ended up being huge for them in the first game with Fitzsimmons and Rafe Snyder. But tough for Florida State because, Friday was so shocking. The Noles hadn't really blown a lead like that, 5-2. With 6 outs to go, they usually locked it down once they got there. And it was a reminder that when you struggle offensively to separate, you do leave yourself vulnerable to those types of innings. Even if they're unlikely and your team has not shown that that's what they would do and have done throughout the season, you still are vulnerable. And I think, we'll talk more about some of the other regionals at the end of the pod, but like Georgia Tech, you and I had talked about how their arms at times were giving up some runs, and you were worried about the vulnerability, right, of losing a game 10-7 or 9-8 when your offense was limited just enough if you're Georgia Tech, but your arms couldn't quite get you over the hump. You leave yourself vulnerable in a winner-take-all type of game where it's do or die, right? And you don't have tomorrow to win. I think Georgia Tech's team was built to win 50 of 60 games that they played, but maybe as the things honed in and it became a 2 out of 3 against some of those power arms, it might be a little bit different, right? The math is a little bit different as you play those games as they hone in. For Florida State, the math was always the same after Miles went down. You were going to most likely hold teams to 5 or 6 runs or less. And the question was, could you get between 6 and 8 runs a game? Was that possible? And it looked to be pretty difficult for Florida State after, and just never had crooked numbers. The number of times you had a 3-run inning felt few and far between. It seemed like some solo shots were in order, solo home runs, maybe a 2 spot here and there, but Florida State just also never took enough advantage of what other teams gave them. And some of that's by design with the offense, not putting a ton of pressure on teams via walks and on-base percentage, right? It was a struggle, right? And I think Link even said it. He said, I know it wasn't pretty and there were some chinks in our armor offensively. And that ultimately leaves you in some tight baseball games. And a credit to your pitching staff for most of the time getting you on the right side of that equation. But this weekend, were both losses 1-run losses? Is that correct?
Yes.
It was 6-5 and then 5-4. So that just shows you how razor thin that margin was this year. And I don't think Florida State could, they could have been in Omaha in 2 weeks. It would have been the same type of team with the same type of equation and hoping that you're 1 run better with the way the game plays out, right? Like that was going to always be the equation for this group. And unfortunately, it just didn't go your way this weekend in Tallahassee.
Yeah, ultimately that falls on the offense. A lot of stuff happened this weekend. There's a lot of plays. There's a lot of pitches that you can look back on and things that you can nitpick on. You can nitpick some, coaching decisions and stuff like that. But ultimately, it just falls on the offense and the lack of ability to come up with big hits and big innings. You faced 3 pitching staffs that all had an ERA over 5. And I understand they're using their best arms in these settings, but that's ERAs over 5 in the Sun Belt, the MAC, and the Big East. You're Florida State. You're in the ACC. You need to be able to hit those pitching staffs, and you need to be able to put big numbers on those pitching staffs, and they just couldn't. If you take out the 1 extra inning that they played, which was the only inning that they scored 3 or more runs in, which was exactly 3. They never scored more than 4 runs or 4 or more runs in an inning in the 36 innings they played in this regional. They scored more than 1 run, I think 4 times. So 3 of those times was 2, and then the other one was the 3 runs. If you take out the 1 3-run extra inning, so just in regulation, basically, they scored 15 runs across 4 games. Like it's just not good enough. And it's just hard to win that way. And yes, there was still a recipe to win that way. And there was still a way you could have gotten it done, and a path in which you could have gotten it done if you had held on to the leads that you held. But ultimately, like you should have never been in a spot in those games where the things that happened allowed the other teams to flip the switch on you like that, and specifically just St. John's, because they're the only ones that got you. But like NIU easily could have gotten you as well. You were down 4-3 in the 8th. You had to come back, and then you won by 1. You won 2-1, and in a game where you had to have Beard come in and give you 4 shut, or else you don't win that one. So, and I understand you faced Fluky in that one for the first 3 and the third, but like ultimately you just didn't get the job done offensively, and didn't really even come close to getting the job done offensively.
One of these years, Brett, we're going to have this year's pitching staff with last year's offense or 2 years ago's offense, and it's all just going to come together. That's the hope. I was thinking about that the other day. I was actually texting some friends who cover ACC baseball, and they said, imagine if Georgia Tech's offense and FSU's pitching staff merged together. And I was like, yeah, that's probably a national title going away, right? Pretty easily going to win an Natty. It's not how it works, unfortunately, but hopefully next year you get a balance, right? Maybe you take a step down in pitching just a touch, but you can take a step forward with the offense, and maybe that overall equation of offense to pitching and defense finds that nice zone, right? And it hovers in a zone that allows you to be more successful for longer periods in the postseason. I look at a team like Alabama, right? We're struggling to hit the baseball all year, but they took advantage of bad pitching staffs this weekend in their regional, and they scored 20-something runs against Alabama State and double digits, I think, against some of the other teams they played. They pummeled Oklahoma State like they should have in terms of offensively against those pitching staffs, and that's the case you're making, right, Brett? It doesn't have to necessarily be the most potent of offenses that scares you. You just have to take advantage of bad pitching, and the Noles just could not do that this postseason, and it was weird, man. The weather made it weird. The crowd, I'll give FSU fans a lot of credit. Sunday night was electric, but we didn't get enough of that this weekend because of the weather. Didn't have a chance to really have Hauser make the difference that it can consistently at home, and that's just June weather in Tallahassee. And the NCAA kind of botched some stuff there on Saturday with the tarp, and kind of made a mess of it. It's always interesting when guys who come into Tallahassee who don't know how Tallahassee works weather-wise end up trying to make decisions, and they've got to call the NCAA in Indianapolis, and then they got to call ESPN, in terms of, well, what time do you want to restart? What channel do you want to put it on? And there's just too much going on there that ultimately it hurts the players instead of helps them. And I don't know what the right answer is there, Brett. I don't know what you can do to make things better. But I do know this time of year in the Southeast, it's a mess for, everybody. And maybe you have regional guys that live in Florida that can work for the NCAA that can help give them a better idea of what's going on. But that Saturday was not acceptable in Tallahassee. That can't happen. And who else hurt from that? The fans hurt from that. There was a lot of fans just sitting in the ballpark. I felt awful for them. It was hot. It was humid. They're trying to figure out whether they want to stay or go home. It's been a long day. You got kids, elderly people. I saw the ambulance come out at least once. It's not a good look. It's not a good overall product for people coming to games in the Southeast this time of year. We've got to come together with a better idea, and that's from the NCAA down, and figuring out how do we cater this thing to the fans and the players for their safety. Now, I will credit both coaching staffs and the NCAA for, once the field Saturday was clearly not playable for the players, both coaches pulled the plug on it, and Michael Alford pulled the plug on it. and you could see that they weren't going to run them back out there. Not that night with the way that the field was. But I do hope that we can come together with a little bit better communication as this thing goes forward. And you heard what Kevin Schnall had to say after the game, right, for Coastal. And Link didn't seem too pleased about it. And ultimately, West didn't get to pitch again outside of 50 pitches, which was tough. And you had to use Trey Beard, right, on the restart, which changes the math with what you could have used him for down the line. And then you could have maybe started Whited against St. John's and Manka available in relief or for a game 7 winner take all. The Noles had the pitching, I think, to make this thing doable for FSU out of the losers bracket, but ultimately it ended up being chaos with what happened Saturday. But yeah, it's tough. And it goes back to, you tell me if I'm wrong, Brett. If you can hit and your offense mashes, it mitigates some of that script work, as I call it, right? Some of that, you need it to be perfect script, perfect type of day. Everything goes to plan. If you can hit, that gets you out of a lot of messes when you have a lineup that can score double digits and mash their way to a win. And you saw Auburn be able to do that in their comeback against Milwaukee. And this group, unfortunately, it just didn't happen for them in that way.
Yeah, I think you're definitely correct on that. And that fact that you have to stay to a script because of, the offense not being able to just go out there and mash and just, winning games for you. And you also have to stick to the script because you really only stick to like a core 5 or 6 guys on the pitching staff for most of the season. And that's just kind of their philosophy and how they have done it, the last 3 years. Like I think they tried to add depth this year, but ultimately like the pitching staff ended up being 5 or 6 guys again, really. Like that's what it was. And sometimes it's hard to have more than that in this day and age of college baseball.
Weird weekend, man. I mean, what a weird season. Link and I were talking over the weekend before one of the games, and Link was like, we haven't had a normal week really since the Miami series. And he's right. This team got faced with a ton of strange stuff, right? Having to go to the ACC tournament on Monday, and not play till Friday. Some of the fields they were given in Charlotte were not adequate. They gave them an all-turf field to practice on one day, and then it rained on that turf field. Just everything was strange about the final few weeks of the year, and it's not an excuse, but it is a ton of adversity that you have to overcome when you're already dealing with, one of the biggest adversities any team's going to have to go through all year, and that's losing a potential ACC Player of the Year candidate and a Golden Spikes Award candidate. So that's why I say, Brett, I will remember this team fondly. It wasn't a beauty pageant, but I will remember their fight, and down to Cal Fisher, who, I mean, man, the whole fan base had quit on him completely and utterly. Cal could have walked in the middle of the night, could have left town, and I don't think people would have said anything about him in a positive way, which is sad, right? Like when that happens. Cal could have packed it in and quit. And instead, he was the best hitter in the regional, probably not named Adam Agresti. Says a lot about him. And I'm proud of that kid. Seeing the emotion in his eyes at the end of the season was tough. I hope he comes back next year. I really do. I'm expecting him back in a similar uniform, and another captain who's going to be a senior next year. Man, what a job. I was just smiling the entire time. 7 for 13 with 3 homers. The swing looked completely reworked. He shows you the toughness. You called him postseason Cal. And, down to the final inning, hits a 2-run homer to give you some life. And that's just who that kid is. And he embodies, I think, what this group was as a whole. Tough. Down to the T. To the very final out, you had the tying run on first base, right? And that just says, you're not packing it in. Things aren't going your way. And yeah, I mean, that was cool to see from him. And I hope that, as we turn the page to next year, you kind of build around some of the pieces that you have. And there's not a lot of pieces coming back. I mean, you do have to go into the portal. Do you want to switch the conversation to the portal? Is there anything else you want to add on? Did you want to comment on Cal or anybody else player-wise from the weekend before we kind of push forward?
I was just going to say, I think that's the reason why despite being frustrating, it seemed to be one of the teams that Link grew to like the most that he's had. He seemed incredibly emotional at the press conference to end the season on Monday. And, we've had end of season press conferences with Link before. And I was thinking back, like, I don't remember them being that emotional in that way. Like, I can't remember seeing emotion from Link like that. And, he's totally fine to show emotion like that. It just was something new from Link. And I thought it said a lot about how he felt about this year's group, despite not getting the result they wanted to. But yeah, I'd never seen Link quite that emotional at a presser before. So I thought it spoke a lot to that.
Yeah, it's a group, again, I'll remember fondly in terms of the way they fought, because they gave you a chance. And that comes down to what we said in some of those instant reacts, what Mendez gave you, what Beard gave you, what Kinnear and Purcell gave you. They gave you everything they had left. And Manka was extended out past 70 pitches. Yeah, they all gave you whatever they could. And that was all you could ask from them.
And that was cool to see on Monday too. It seemed like everybody was all hands on deck. Like, I don't know if Link would have ended up letting everybody be. Like, I don't know if he would have let Cooper White go back out there after throwing 70 pitches the day before. But I think Cooper was telling them, like, I'm ready to go if you want me. And like you said, Wes had run down to the bullpen, and he had been in the bullpen the most of the game. But when Cal hit the home run to put them down 1, Wes went and started throwing in the bullpen, and it was actually throwing off the mound, starting to get warmed up. So they had some guys that were ready to go that were going to throw on short rest for sure.
That'd have been really cool to see, wouldn't it have?
Yeah.
Yeah, it would have been awesome. Again, we'll remember this team fondly, but you got to acknowledge some of the areas that they have to get better at and they have to improve. And as we, I think, push this conversation here past the half-hour mark of what does Florida State try to pursue in the portal with the recruiting class, we've got some names coming in, and then guys who have already announced that they're gone. Brett, can you just go through quickly the names that have already decided to move on from Florida State and what that means for this group's overall roster going forward and what they'll have to do?
Yeah, Manny Lantigua and Charlie Buckles are the only two that have officially entered the portal, but Chase Williams, Noah Sheffield, and Kelvin Paulino Jr. have all shared their intentions to enter the portal as well. Chase obviously being the one out of that group that has had the most production at FSU. Kelvin started the year really, really well, and then went through a slump and never really got back in the lineup and never really found a position in the field throughout this season. Kelvin was the highest ranked player in last year's recruiting class. I believe he was number 51 in the class. Lantigua was someone who had left before the postseason. I think only threw a couple innings this year. He's someone that came in as a two-way player before transitioning to only being a pitcher. Chef, we saw Chef a lot at the beginning of this year and not much at the second half, similar to Paulino, kind of, trying to figure out a position, and went through a slump and never, really got out of it. And Charlie Buckles redshirted this year. He never had any at-bats because of that. They decided not to, change that decision when Miles went down. I think, I don't think that Buckles, a lot of people made the jump that Buckles entering the portal meant that Miles would be back. I don't think those two things are correlated whatsoever. I think Buckles was going to enter the portal either way because of, not getting any PT this year and being redshirted. So, yeah, I don't think those situations are quite correlated. But those are the only guys that have so far shared or officially entered the portal.
Yeah, disappointed about Paulino. I really believe in what his upside is, and I wish him the best. Chef's another one. When he got hot, you could see game-changing impact, and such a good kid that the teammates really gravitate towards, and he's going to do well, I think, in his next stop too. Really cool to talk to his dad this weekend, not just because I was a Braves fan growing up and getting to talk to Gary Sheffield, but hearing from Gary about, baseball knowledge and in-game IQ and things like that, just picking his brain was really cool. And I wish Noah the best. He was always awesome. to deal with at Florida State, and a good kid who was on this podcast and shared his story. And I know Noles fans will be rooting for him for sure. Chase Williams, I do think he's in the portal, but I think he's going to get drafted late. Someone will take a flyer on just some of the tool set. And if not, I could see a team giving him a undrafted free agent opportunity. And I just think Chase is the type that will start his minor league career next year if he gets the opportunity. I just don't see what he would gain by going to play one final year to make the same type of signing bonus next year, right? And like that's, to me, from what I've heard, I believe Chase is going to get an opportunity late in the draft and pursue that. So we'll see if that comes to fruition or not. But that's tough on Buckles as well. I mean, that's a big bat with a lot of power, and I wonder where his next stop will be and what he can do. But there's a lot to like there about the size and the physicality of Buckles. So I wish him well too. But yeah, I'm trying to think of. Let's talk some draft Noles, and then let's circle back to FSU in the portal, who they would try to pursue and what they would try to pursue, because I feel like in a linear path, this makes the most sense. Obviously, I think everybody wants to know about Miles Bailey. Brett, what's the latest intel you have on the type of decision Miles is going to have to make as we get closer to the draft?
Yeah, so first off on Miles, the biggest thing for him will be how MLB teams view his medicals coming off his injury and what they see there once they're able to get there and do that stuff with him. I think if you're able to get past that point for Miles, if teams feel comfortable with where he's at, if they're willing to go from there to trying to really evaluate him as a player, which they've already all done, but now versus other players on their boards. But yeah, that'll be number one for him. We'll just be making sure the medicals are right. That's not something that, we'll be privy to. Like we won't, and not that I would know what I'm looking at anyways. But that stuff will be decided by teams, doctors. And then from there, Miles is someone who I believe turned down 7 figures coming out of high school. I think for him to go this year, it's going to take 7 figures, at least that number. Maybe a little bit more than that, but I kind of have been working under the expectation that if Miles was to get 7 figures, that he's going to go. I do think FSU is making an aggressive push to try to get him back with NIL money, but I think they also know that Miles has a very good chance of being drafted and getting the money that he wants to get. Miles is a very unique prospect. He, is probably in like the 99th percentile of average exit velos, 90th percentile exit velos, launch angles. His chase rate too is very, very exceptional. Those are all things that are awesome for Miles, but the one thing that is not good is his in zone contact rate. So I think, he's kind of a prolific, there's some teams that might be really high on him. There's some teams that might not be as high on him, but ultimately the ceiling for Miles, if he was to hit that, is an extremely impactful MLB player that has 40 plus homer potential in a 162 game season. I personally don't feel like Miles has anything left to prove at FSU. He was doing exactly what he needed to do this year in his draft year production wise before he went down. His strikeout rate was, it's not great. It wasn't like minuscule. I think it was still 24%, but it was down from last year, which was what he needed to do. He was producing power at a crazy rate. He was walking at a crazy rate. He was playing stellar defense, like everything. And my thing too is like Miles has just gotten so much better since his senior year of high school. And then from senior year of high school, even from preseason of freshman year to then the middle of the season to the end of the season, and then from there to this year, how much better he's gotten. He just continues to get better. So I expect Miles to be drafted still. I think somewhere from like middle second to middle third. I think 83, I want to say, is the last pick that has 7 figures for the slot value. Obviously teams can go above slot, so he could go after that too and still get 7 figures, but that's kind of the range where I think it caps itself out at. I do think, like I said, with the NIL push FSU can make, that it might move his number up a little bit, maybe a couple 100,000. But I would be working, if I was building the roster, under the expectation that Miles was going to be drafted. I just don't think you can afford over these next 5 weeks to just think that Miles is going to be on your roster and he's going to be part of your lineup. I think you need to build it with the expectation he's going to be drafted. Unless he was to tell you before then, like, hey, I definitely am coming back and I'm pulling myself out of the draft, obviously. But as of now, that has not happened.
And that wouldn't be smart for Miles, right? To give up ahead of the draft, to show his hand, if that makes sense, and to tell you he's coming back if someone's willing to give him a top dollar amount. And I think it's going to be unique to see what kind of team drafts him, which type of team, what type of organization, and some have better medical rehab opportunities. You saw, the Dodgers have been really good with guys like Crowell and Leiter. Now those are pitchers, not position players, but that shows you a good medical staff and a plan. I'd also keep in mind, once he gets drafted, look to see the organization that drafts him. How are they signing some of their other picks? Are they saving money by signing under slot on some high school prospects? Are they saving X amount of dollars that they could then, in theory, pay Miles over slot for where he's at to try and entice him to sign? All these teams have a pool, right, of money that they're using, and the teams will try and be as efficient as possible with the pool money they have to sign as many possible players as they can that they drafted. And so I don't know that Miles's negotiation will be a quick one. I think it might take some time, and that's part of what Link Jarrett was talking about in terms of it's such a difficult time in college baseball with the portal and the timelines and the process and where the draft is to try and really know what your team will look like next year. It might be early August before we fully know what Florida State can get. A guy like Braden Dowd didn't come into the picture for FSU until later when there was some money available after the Noles lost some high school kids to the draft, right? And some signees, and that allowed some extra money. So this process is going to be there. For Miles, I wish the best for that kid, whether that's to come back. Selfishly, I would love to see him one more year. But for him, I want him to get paid and to be in the pros as soon as possible as well. And, Kevin and Aaron have done a terrific job raising him. Miles is as genuine as a person as you will find, who loves Florida State more than anything. And he was in the dugout with his team this weekend, which was really cool to see. But he deserves his opportunity. I hope he gets the money that he wants. If Florida State offers him a enticing NIL package or some kind of offer to try and make that an easier decision for him to come home, to come back, then that would be awesome too. But, if Miles was your kid, you're going to want the best for Miles. And I hope that someone pays him a lot of money. I really do, but I will be keeping my eye out on which team drafts him, what the slot value is, and how they're signing their other guys that they drafted. If they're paying over slot for some of the other names, that might be good news for Florida State fans wanting him to come back. But again, like you said, Brett, and I'll throw this to you, he doesn't have a whole lot left to prove because he's kind of shown you the prospect that he can be, I think, in the 2 years that he's been in Tallahassee. And I don't know if that's going to change a ton more in the eyes of scouts as he moves forward.
Yeah, and the thing I was going to add, and this goes for everybody, not just Miles, is like everybody talks about leverage, but I just think that age matters more than leverage at this point. Like, I just think that the biggest thing is starting the clock on your pro career. Like, once you're in college, like, get into pro ball and start that clock, start your journey to the majors. Like, we've seen guys recently make that move really quick too. And Miles is someone who I think once he gets back to health could make that move really, really quick if he's playing well. Like, we saw Cam the very next year be on an MLB roster in opening day. Everybody talks about Miles and Nick Kurtz being similar type profiles, and Kurtz was drafted much higher than Miles would be here in this scenario. But like he was someone that moved incredibly quick too. And I think that's the trend we're seeing more recently with the college players. Like Cags was the same way. Jack Cagliano, he moved extremely quick to the Royals in the majors. So, I think getting there, like if Miles was to stay for another year, he would be, 22 already next year by the time he gets drafted. And not saying that's old, obviously, but it's different than going right now and being 21. So I just think that the biggest thing is getting in as early as you can age-wise over leverage, because he would have a couple more years to play with at FSU.
Not to mention that the real money comes on your second big league contract, right? And so you'd be a year sooner to trying to get to that number and to that second contract when you really get paid, right? So if that's 26, 27 years old as opposed to 28 years old, that matters as well when you're doing this math. And that's some stuff his agent will have to figure out. And we'll try and, I think, relay to him, obviously. But you and I are both, we want Miles back. That'd be awesome. It would make your team significantly better next year. However, the Bailey family has to do what's best for them. And whatever decision that is, you have the full support of me and Brett. And hopefully that's good news, whatever way that turns. Can you give me some other names in the draft? Obviously, guys like Brody DeLamielleure, Hunter Carnes, Braden Dowd are in the mix. I don't expect any of your pitchers to come back that are draftable, especially not from your weekend rotation. There's some bullpen arms there that I think have some decisions to make too. But as you try and piece this thing together, give us some names of guys that you're also keeping an eye on as we get closer to the draft.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of other guys that can hear their names called in the draft this year. I think Wes first, obviously, probably going pretty early. I want to say like early to mid second for Wes, and even I could see him going up into 20, like picks 25 to 40, which I think like 25 and 26 are the last two picks of the first. And then those next like 13 picks or so are comp round, which would technically be first round, I think. I think that Beard, Moore, and Abraham are all going to go in a similar range from the 4th to 6th, somewhere in there. They're all very different pitchers, but I think that all those guys are guys that have, with their work this year, deserve to go in that range. Cole Stokes, I think, just with the arm talent, is someone that will go somewhere like 8th to 12th round. We saw Gavin Adams go in the 8th. He's similar profile. He went there despite having TJ. Yeah, I think Kinnear, Purcell, Manka, and Meeble are all guys that maybe, Purcell probably number one in that group. Just his stuff grades out really wise. His stuff grades out really well metrically. So I feel like he's somewhat like all those guys. I think if they were to go, it'd be like rounds 11 through 10 in the slots where they're all 150,000. And anything over that counts to a team's bonus pool. I think with Kinnear, it's just like you would think with that production this year and performance that he would go. I think it's just his size as a right-handed reliever that is the only con for Kinnear. But I think performance-wise, you would expect usually a guy like that to go in Tucson. Manka is someone that was awesome in the Cape last summer, but just had this year limited by injury. He is someone that I do think could make money by coming back. Like he's another guy that has a couple years left. But I think someone might have really liked his performance in the Cape last year. And I also think that Manka is someone that character-wise I just really enjoy and I really like. And I think that, if MLB team gets to interview him, they probably would come away thinking the same thing. Meeble, it's just a left-handed pitcher that's touched 95, so always a chance there. The other two from the roster, I think Carnes and DeLamielleure, those are both that I could see going, and I could also see being back. For both those guys, it's just going to depend on what teams are willing to give them and what they're willing to take. I think both of them would definitely be guys that would go in the 11th to 20th for 150K if they wanted it, but I don't know if they would want that. Brody, I think, really came on at the end of the year, and there's some really, really good things there with the bat skills. It's just the lack of walks and some of the chasing in the profile that I wonder if teams have concern about. I think he only walked 5 times this year. And then for Carnes, it's just do teams feel like he can still catch at the next level? And Carnes is someone that, was like similar to Miles coming out, really high profile and probably turned down a good bit of money. So like, does he feel like he can come back and make more towards that he turned down? So those are a couple of interesting cases with the bats. But I think, like you said, usually with the arms, we see them end up going and signing. And really anybody who goes, unless it's like rounds 17 to 20, just expect them to sign. 99% of the time they're going to sign. And usually those negotiations are done by the time the pick is, submitted by the team.
Those are fair points. I think Carnes and Delamelier for me are the ones keeping a major eye on because they could be starters for you next year. And I think both have a lot to gain by coming back and trying to up their stock a little bit. Same with a guy like Manka, who I think could hypothetically be in your rotation next year. I think he'll continue to condition, get himself back into playing shape from the injury. And I really like his competitiveness and his makeup. And you saw that, I think, against St. John's, what he was willing to give you at not 100%. And he has a chance, I think, as a starter to really bolster his draft stock next year. So that's one that I'm keeping an eye on and keeping a finger crossed for a guy like Manka to come back. Yeah.
Can I just add on Manka? I was really excited to see 92, 93 touching some fours early on in that outing. That was really good to see from him.
Do you agree that's a kid who could be in your rotation next year?
Yeah. When I watched almost every single one of Manka's starts in the Cape, and I absolutely loved it. And I thought he was going to be great for FSU as a midweek starter this year. And I just felt like as a starter, he was really consistent and just got like better. Each start he kind of built off of and was able to improve on it each start. So yeah, I think he's just one of those guys that is kind of built to be a starter. And I wouldn't be surprised. He's always kind of a little bit reminded me of like Joey Vellini. Like maybe there's some Joey Vellini in there.
I like that. See, I'm looking down the list of guys on the team as we look at the portal and what Florida State needs to do in the portal. Well, should we comment? I guess we can probably have a draft pod and talk about the high school kids and where some of these guys will go maybe a couple weeks from now. So let's keep the idea on portal right now as we try and finish off this podcast nearing an hour. In the infield, assuming you probably need a first baseman if Miles decides to go. Second base, it will be interesting to see how Jace Estes recovers from the injury. I really thought he would be your starting second baseman by the end of the year had he not gotten hurt. That's kind of a wild card. Shortstop, does Frazier come back? Does Florida State bring him back? Does he decide to come back? Showed you some really nice things, I thought, this year when he was in there for you. And then third base, expecting Cal to be back. We'll see. It seems like some of the pieces are, at catcher. Do you keep Carnes at catcher? Do you try and help him develop at a different position in the outfield? What do you do? Obviously, you're going to need to keep John Stutzer in Tallahassee. I think he will be a hot name for other programs to try and poach. So that's going to take, I think, some resources there to keep a guy like Stutzer in Tallahassee. And I'm confident Florida State will do what it takes because that could be a cornerstone of your lineup next year. Center fields, maybe that is Stutzer, but that means you probably have room for a couple of outfield positions, an infield position, a catcher, and then a ton of arms. You're going to need a ton of arms. Heavy portal action on the arms. But, Brett, as you look at what the Noles will try and pursue, where do you start making your list at positions?
Yeah, I think after this year, they're going to want to be offensive. I don't think they're going to allow themselves to be in a position again like they were this year with the offense. I think they're going to try to go out and get offensive. And I also think that Link will want them to be much better than they were this year defensively. I don't think they had a good enough defense to back up the plan of being, of pitching being their strength. So I think, first and foremost, catcher, like you said, first base. I do think they'll also bring in one other infielder at least to add to that competition. Like you said, some of that could depend on Fisher and Frazier, whether they stay or go. In the outfield, I really like Stetzer as well, and think that you could plug him in as your center fielder for the next 2 years. Just really like his athletic profile, and you feel like he can really go and get it in center. And then, if Brody was back, you feel like that would be one of your corner outfielders. But with the chance of him not being back, I think you probably need to go out and get a couple outfielders. Because one of your high school guys that is an outfielder, he could potentially be drafted and signed as well. And then, you're going to need arms. I mean, like every offseason, you're going to need to go out and add arms. I would guess that the number gets close to or even more than last year. And I can't remember the exact number, but I want to say they were close to double digits. Maybe it was like 8 they took last year. But I think they'll get up there in the numbers again this year and adding arms. And I really hope that they get more balanced on both sides. You were talking earlier about the left-handed hitters. They need more left-handed pitchers too. They need to be able to match up better out of the bullpen, I think, from the left-handed side, because they didn't really have too much of that this year. And we knew that going into the season. So, it's going to be an active portal cycle. There's going to be a lot of movement. There's still more movement out to be had. I don't think it's done with guys going into the portal. And I don't think it'll be long before the movement in starts getting active here.
Yeah, I already know Florida State's got guys on campus as we're recording this podcast. So they're active right now. I think maybe a small benefit, call it a silver lining if you would like, to your season ending a weekend sooner than maybe you expected, or 2 weekends sooner than you expected. I'm not sure. The silver lining is you can get a move on some of the exit interviews and building a roster for next year and being ahead of the game. I do also think patience is required, because there are still teams this weekend. There are mid-majors that are playing in super regionals, and then you have Omaha. And so some of those SEC teams as well that are going to start, they have some big money, right, in NIL. Some of this won't even really heat up for another 2 or 3 weeks NIL-wise. But a lot of teams are getting after it right now. I know Florida just committed the kid from FGCU. That's a big name. And then I actually saw, Brett, I was looking at my phone, Colin Priest from Clemson going to UCF. So Wally has a big one in store there, down there in Orlando. So things are getting active. LSU's after it. Vandy's after it. Their seasons ended before they got to Omaha. Before they got to the postseason. Arkansas getting after it. There will be a lot going on, and I know the Noles are not wasting any time. And they've got some names that I think will be pretty impressive coming to town, and hopefully you lock them up. And I think as we get down the road here in the month of June, we can maybe talk on some of these guys who end up committing in the next couple of weeks and before the draft. But Florida State's not going to waste any time. I know they know that they need to get on this, and in that middle infield specifically, you just need some more power. And I think your infield combined for 11 home runs this year, the final infield that you ran out there in your lineup. And last year you had 33 combined between Ludice and Farrell up the middle only. Not to mention, obviously, what Miles gave you, right? And Cal, I think last year hit 8 or 9 home runs. So significant power that needs to, I think, be back in the fold for Florida State. You've got to be more offensive. You've got to be able to put more crooked numbers on the scoreboard. You've got to give yourself some separation and some breathing space for your pitching staff to not always feel like they're under pressure. And defensively, Brett, I do think if the Noles were better defensively this year, they could have gotten away with the elite pitching, elite defense combo. It just felt like that combination was imperfect in its own right. And so that could be something that they look for next year. They're getting after it, man. They are. Get some more left-handed bats in there, and let's see how this thing turns out. I'm curious as to what some of these guys will do, and I trust Link Jarrett to know what it's going to take, right, to flip the offense, and he will. He definitely will. Guys with better pitch recognition maybe as well. Guys who can go up there and work a really good at bat. I love the addition of Braden Dowd. I really loved it. I thought more prototypes like Dowd would be a good add. Some power, some average, OBP, the ability to spit on pitches, quality at bats, and a good overall kid as well that fits a clubhouse. That was a really good get. And then, I'm not going to talk about the high school kids right now, but once we get to that draft preview that we do, we can talk more.
Yeah, I was just going to say, you made me realize I forgot Dowd when I was talking about the draft guys. He's another one, I think, somewhere third to fifth rounds. I really like him as a draft bat. I think he's a type of profile that's going to transition really, really, really well into pro ball when it comes to his swing decisions and quality of contact.
I think he'll make the pros. I just genuinely believe that's a MLB at bat.
Yeah, me too.
His expected batting average was well north of what he ended up. I mean, it's just quality at bat after quality at bat. And I still think there's a little power in there to uptick from what you've seen, which has consistently gone up in his time in college. So enjoyed covering Braden for the 1 year that he was in Tallahassee. I thought that was a really good get. 5 minutes or so on the craziness of college baseball. You know what made this weekend a lot easier to digest? I was really hot after the final out. It was really tough. I genuinely believed Florida State would at least push it to a 7th game against St. John's. And I actually kind of thought they would win both and get to Omaha. No disrespect to St. John's, but at home, I felt like the Noles would do enough. But as I looked around college baseball, Brett, for the weekend, when the Gators went down, let's be honest, that made everything at least 20% better. Felt better immediately watching Troy do that to Sully, which FSU didn't really choke. Florida choked. Like that's what Florida did. Florida was up in the winner's bracket and had to lose to a mid-major with no pitching left twice. And all those mid-90s and upper 90s arms got pummeled twice by Troy. Shout out to Troy. Shout out Skylar Meade. That's awesome. Go Trojans. That made me smile. But then you look around the country, and Georgia Tech and UCLA both went down in regionals. Two teams that not only did people think would make Omaha, but many thought would play for the national title. That lets you know how different this thing is right now. The college baseball world is absurd. It's crazy. Auburn had to fight tooth and nail to beat Milwaukee. Southern Miss goes down, right, in their regional. Was it Little Rock who comes out of there? Pretty incredible, right? Weekend all around college baseball. And I used incredible as a baseball fan. Not fun when your team goes down, but it gives you some perspective, I think, on what this thing is right now. And not that all of it's correlated, but it does make you feel a little bit better when you see that this could happen to anyone, to teams that you felt like maybe were built a little stronger than what you had coming into the tournament. And Georgia Tech specifically, ouch. That was a team I did feel could win a national title because of the bats. I had questions about their arms. They had gotten a lot better on the mound, but I still felt they were vulnerable. But I thought the bats would be able to make up for it no matter what. And I can't even imagine what it's like right now in that locker room in that city in Midtown Atlanta, trying to process that their season has ended, because that was a complete stunner. Or the UCLA team that brought everybody back essentially from Omaha last year, and they're not going back. Do I have this right, Brett? No 8 teams from Omaha last year are going back?
I believe that's correct, yeah.
I think supers are completely different this year too, almost all the way through. It's completely different super regional matchups. Just kind of showing you the parity in college baseball right now. And it did make the weekend overall easier to digest. And that's always, I don't want to say it's nice, but it does give some perspective.
Yeah, it's just a great reminder how hard this sport is and how brutal it can be. I mean, no matter how good you are, anybody can get you on any given day. And I know that's cliche, but like that is what it is. I would have never expected Georgia Tech to lose when they lost, and same with UCLA. And it's crazy. Some of these super regional matchups are crazy. I mean, you've got one of Little Rock and Troy is going to Omaha. Who's West Virginia playing? West Virginia is playing Cal Poly.
Who didn't have to play UCLA once.
Yeah, and Kansas and Oklahoma are playing.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's crazy that Cal Poly didn't even have to play UCLA to win that regional. But yeah, it's just a great reminder of how hard this sport is. And I think the reason I was so surprised that FSU lost to St. John's, even with that, like, we know that this sport is hard and you can lose on any given day, but I was just surprised by it because we haven't seen FSU under Link lose those games to those types of teams. And that's no disrespect intended. Like, that St. John's team played right in front of my eyes. I thought they were very good, but it's like FSU was 18-0 this year against non-Power 4 teams. And I don't think you would say that St. John's, well, maybe they were because they're the only one of those teams still playing, but I don't think on paper you would have said going into the year that St. John's was the best of those teams. So that was just why it was surprising for me that FSU did end up losing to one of them in this setting at home. But it gets everybody, and it's just as brutal for everybody. Like, it's for as long as the season ends. I mean, for as long as the season is, it ends so quick, and it gets you by surprise every single time. Every single time it feels like it happened in the blink of an eye, even though it's a 9-inning game with 27 outs or 54 in total. It still feels like it happened so quick and out of nowhere. Like, I felt great when FSU was up 2-0 on Monday. I felt like, they're going to be fine. They're going to do this. They're going to find their way out of this. And then Agresti slams the ball over the center field wall, and all of a sudden you're writing about how FSU's season's over. So, yeah, it's just how it is, and it's what makes baseball great and college baseball great. I mean, I had so much fun being back this weekend at Hauser. I thought it was, even though it went the way it did, even though there was some craziness to it and there were some long weather delays, it still was a lot of fun being a part of postseason baseball. It doesn't get any better than postseason baseball to me.
How awesome is college baseball as a product right now?
It's great. I love the emotion of it. I hope that they don't take the emotion out of it. I like seeing guys play with emotion and celebrate with their teammates. Don't celebrate at the other team, but when you celebrate with your teammates and you play with intensity in the right way and play with emotion in the right way, it can be extremely enjoyable and entertaining to watch.
ESPN up 38% overall viewership of regionals. That's significant. And that's a credit to all the different outlets that are covering college baseball on top of ESPN, D1 baseball, the 11.7, all those guys, right? Wheels, everybody. This is a team effort to get this sport in front of as many eyes as possible. And I'll be honest with you, Brett, it sucks for Florida State, but the commentator in me that calls other teams knows that a team like St. John's in a pro market like New York City being in the spotlight right now for them. I saw a number of big name outlets from the New York area covering St. John's winning. It's a good thing for the sport overall. It's not good for Florida State. I would have rather it was St. John's over the Gators, and I would have been happier. But it's phenomenal that now you're going to see big pro markets paying attention, and I hope they do. And that's how this sport becomes big, and that's how you get more games on national television, and that's how you get more games on ABC and more access. And this thing continues to grow, and I don't think it's slowing down anytime soon. And, I hope Florida State, the day they do win a national title, it has massive TV ratings because that's where we're headed. And so awesome stuff, man. I enjoyed it. It was good seeing you this weekend as well, man. Thought we would be planning a trip to Tuscaloosa right now. And unfortunately, we're talking about what the 2027 Noles will look like. But that didn't take away from how much fun we had covering it. And those of you listening to our pod, it was awesome to this weekend talk to a few fans who love the pod. And they came up and stopped me and let us know that they love this thing. And we love that you love Florida State baseball, because Brett and I sure do. And we love college baseball, and we'll be back at this thing I think periodically throughout the summer and into the fall, and continue to keep an eye on how things evolve. But this sport's in a good place right now. And I'll be watching Super Regionals. I know a lot of people check out when their team is done, but I won't be. I'll be all in. Supers, Omaha. Excited to see how this thing continues to go forward. So anything else you want to add? I think we'll probably reconvene, right before the draft maybe, and give an update on guys that Florida State has brought in via the portal. Any more news? And then what to look for with MLB drafts. Is that July? What's the date? Do you know? 7th? Do I have that right?
I think it's a little after that. I think it's I think it's the 11th and 12th. It's only 2 days this year.
So mid-July. So maybe a little bit after 4th of July, you and I get together and
11th and 12th.
Okay.
Confirmed.
Anything that's hovering in your brain right now that you wanted to add onto the pod before we sign off?
No, all I got is UNC is my prediction for who's going to win it all now.
They're very good. Georgia's going to be dangerous too, in my opinion. I really like what they have as a complete package. And Texas, if they get healthy and they look like the Texas with all their pieces, will be a tough out too. Who's your mid-major left that you think will create the most concern? If you had to say one that gives you the most confidence, can cause more chaos.
I wouldn't be surprised if that St. John's team found a way to beat Alabama 2 out of 3 games. Troy's probably the most dangerous just because they are playing Little Rock, and they are I think Troy can be really, really offensive, and they showed that in Gainesville. And I think Skylar Mead's a really good coach, and they don't ever play scared. So Troy's probably the most dangerous, but I wouldn't be surprised if St. John's kept on playing and found a way.
I like Alabama's arms. So if they find a way to get into Omaha, I think they can limit some people in that park with what they can throw at you on the mound. Auburn has a little bit of a complete profile, in my opinion, too. I love what Butch has done there, Butch Thompson, and good starting pitching, and I think a lineup that's slept on that they needed to come back and help them win their regional. Them versus Ole Miss, I'll be tuning into. And then I know I said Georgia's one of my national title favorites, but if Mississippi State beats them, there is a nice profile there for Brian O'Connor's club in Starkville. Good elite starting pitching, serious power bats in the middle of their order. And we'll see. I did not know that Georgia was 4-0 against Mississippi State this year, which I thought was interesting. But we'll see how that thing goes. In Carolina, I think they've got to get over the hump from last year and just find a way to get to Omaha. And they've got a good group there as well, like you said, Brett, that has a complete profile, I think. Kind of a stable floor, right? That allows them, I think, to have some success. But good stuff, brother. I think this was another good pod from us. And again, we appreciate everybody who has tuned in with us all year long. And we'll be back in about a month or so. Let's say a little bit after the July 4th holiday. And we'll reconvene to talk about some stuff regarding Florida State baseball. He's Brett Nevitt. I'm Ariya Masudi. This has been